All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's enjoying the symposium so far. My name is Landon Scheffer. I have the opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Jill Scheffer. She is one of the original founders of the Kittitas Environmental Education Network, or KEEN, all the way back in 1999. She returned to KEEN in 2006 to lead the board into what she refers to as a new era of education, outreach, events, and planning for the Yakima Canyon Interpretive Center. Her educational background is in geography and environmental studies from the University of Victoria, BC. She is currently the section planner for the Toxic Cleanup Program with the Department of Ecology. Previously, Jill worked for Forterra, the region's largest conservation and community building organization, as the Senior Conservation Director and Director of the Central Washington Program. Her two loves are her son and her daughter, who together explore the outdoors and also share their family love of music and dance. Enjoy the presentation. Take it away, Jill.
Thanks, Landon, and thanks to Tricia and Heather for making this online presentation possible. Appreciate their work on this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about KEEN. That's what we call the Kittitas Environmental Education Network for short. And just in case anybody doesn't know me very well, KEEN was named KEEN before the shoe company was. So we win. We have no patent infringement because we don't make shoes, but also we've tried to get money from them and they haven't gotten mad at us. So we did get the name there first. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about our work, our restoration work particularly, but I did want to just briefly mention that KEEN does do a lot of other stuff. Over the past 20 years, we've really grown our programs from our annual Get Intimate with the Shrub Step event, which is a family-friendly get out into the canyon and Yakima River Canyon, for those of you who aren't near Ellensburg or Yakima, and really introduce people to the wildlife and flora and fauna and geology, history, all of that kind of stuff of the canyon. But we have a bunch of different projects too. We do some pure fundraising and fun things like Windfall Cider Fest and music festival. It's not bluegrass anymore, which of course got canceled this year. We do Urban Streams and Brews, which is going through Ellensburg and working with experts to talk about our urban streams. Also got canceled this year. The Yakima River Canyon Bird Fest, also canceled this year, which we do in the Yakima River Canyon. Summer day camps, nature day camps, and some other educational programs I'll talk about in a little bit. So most of our work and all of our restoration work really is focused on Helen McCabe State Park. This is a 64-acre park that is located about 5 miles south of Ellensburg along the Yakima River Canyon Scenic Byway. So you can see how the valley bottom changes right here, and our park is located right at the mouth of the Yakima River Canyon. In this case, for our community, every drop of water, except maybe 1 or 2 streams up north of us, get drained down through this part of the canyon. And so we sort of live at the bottom of the bathtub at Helen McCabe Park. So like I said, it's a 64-acre park. It's right along the Yakima River Canyon Scenic Byway. It's near I-82 and I-90, so 2 big interstate intersections right nearby. About 1 million people drive by this park every year, and most people for the last 40 or so years have not known that it was a park because it didn't really have any things that were interesting about it. That's the outline of the park, and we've been working for the last 20 years to try and make it a little more interesting. It was named after Dr. Helen McCabe, who was a professor at Central Washington University in the 50s and 60s, and she was really a pioneer for outdoor education. There's her photo in the lower left corner there. And she really led the effort to ensure that the Yakima River Canyon Scenic Byway was preserved and that the I-82, the interstate, was built on the hill. Wasn't a popular decision with a lot of folks in our valley. because Department of Transportation did do some land grabbing, I guess is a way to say it, but it did preserve the Yakima River Canyon and all of the things that we love about it now. I've always heard rumors that she lobbied legislature and had a big bike rally that attracted thousands to the canyon to oppose placement of the interstate down the canyon, but I can't find any information about that. So over the last few years, her granddaughter and her son Ross, who's in his late 70s now, have come to visit us, and they are just enthralled with Keen's work there, and so excited that their mother is being remembered and honored. But you can see right behind their heads what State Parks has at the park right now, which is not a super attractive sign or welcoming, really. But we're trying our best to change that. So in 2004, Keene, this is when I was living in Indiana for 4 years, the Keene board came along and found Helen McCabe Park and negotiated a grant, or a lease agreement rather, with Washington State Parks. And the goal of that lease agreement was to build an interpretive center. And this park has been owned since the 70s by the state. Before that, it was used as a gravel pit in the 50s and 60s, and then it was also grazed by cattle for much of its lifetime. This is what it looks like. Looked like in the early days. The green field in front becomes heavily populated by teasel and Russian thistle in the springtime, and this park is notorious in the county for being a weed vector park. Since we've taken it over, we've done a lot to tamp down on those noxious and invasive weeds. But that field particularly, you can see my dog way in the distance. She's now passed on, but that field right there, we've done a lot of restoration work in, and Landon can attest, it is almost all gravel. There's very little dirt layer on top of that. So it's really been compacted and was a great gravel pit. That's the pond that is left over from the gravel pit. It's about 8 acres. It's also heavily impacted by invasive species, but it does get planted by Fish and Wildlife. They do put trout and some other species in there, and it's pretty popular as a fishing spot for families in the region. So in 2008, Keene received grant funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and we did a 10 acres, 6,500 planting project on the park. We worked with a whole bunch of different partners, so I'm just going to list them. That's sort of what it looked like before, just weeds, reed canary grass mostly in the area. We brought in a training partnership with the Kittitas Valley Fire and Rescue to get wildland training on the project, and they did a controlled burn on the site that we were going to plant. So they got their red card training certifications, and we got our field burn. There's Scott Nicolai on the tractor for us. Most of you probably know him. So we worked with the Yakima Nation, we worked with Mid-Columbia Fisheries, with the Washington Conservation Corps, and with Derby Canyon natives to bring in the plants for this project. So we burned it, then we scratched it all up. And then the Conservation Corps, I believe, was out on site for 2 or 3 weeks, hand planting 6,500 plants. They did some live stakes around the bank of Wilson Creek. There were the plants coming in from Derby Canyon, some pretty big plants we were putting in the ground. They went through and they hand dug all of those. Then they put matting, not matting. I think they put plastic down around the bottom, and then they put guards on every single one of those plants. And it's funny to hear the speaker before me talk about those guards, because we had quite the experience with those things. So we did do some live stakes of red osier dogwood and willow. And the goal of this project was really to roughen the floodplain. So there's all our guards. Boy, howdy, that was a big project to get all of those. But you can see the cattle up on the hillside. The park was intermittently grazed during this time. And even though the cattle weren't out there for a long period of time, we certainly wanted to protect our plantings. So we I just sort of give an overview of what it looks like now. You can very clearly see the planting area. We did have at a certain point after we planted hot line going across that very sharp edge to the north to keep the cows out, because the cows were still in this main field. And the goal, like I said, was to help Wilson Creek. It was really, the bank was sharply undercut. We wanted to roughen the floodplain. It does flood back up from the Yakima River occasionally. We've got wetland parts in the park as well. But it is listed, that little part of Poor Wilson Creek is listed for almost everything. It's listed for temperature, bacteria, pH, and ammonia. So it's in rough shape down there. So our goal was really to help with some of those elements. And I know the Department of Ecology is still doing water quality testing on there regularly. And I don't think it's gotten much better, but it was our goal initially. So over the years, we've done a ton of projects, and I'm just going to kind of fly through these. Done a lot of trail building, benches, signs. Speaking of my two kids, that was several years ago right there in the middle. And they now call it my park. And they say, when I say, hey, we're going to my park, they say, oh, what are you going to make us do now? I do make them work when we go down there. And that speaks to, sort of the nonprofit mindset, which is, so we got volunteers. Okay, let's put them to work. So over the years, we've had a lot of really dedicated folks helping us, and lots of partners that we work with on improving the recreational aspects of the park. And I should just say that when we adopted Helen McKay Park, there were no trails, there were no recreational amenities or facilities. You could fish, but there wasn't anywhere to walk, and there weren't any other amenities down there. So we've worked with Boy Scouts to do benches. The one on the right is a memorial bench from local Audubon members who had a person who volunteered with us and with them, and who loved the park. So they put a little memorial bench in to honor her memory a few years ago. And then, we did, of course, the survival monitoring a few years afterwards as part of the grant requirements. And we were finding pretty good survival. We estimated about 65% by 2010. And by that time, we had done hand watering of the 6,500 plants, the 10 acres, which was intensive. We hired people to come in over the summer and once a week do some pretty heavy watering, because it's a pretty dry area. We did some hand pulling of teasel. You can see that was a lot of fun. It's terribly mosquito-y down there because of the wetland. But we had, like the speaker before me was saying, this is what we wanted to happen, though. We wanted flooding to happen. The problem was we didn't really plan to take our pine trees. We didn't have a ton of pine trees planted, but we did have some pines planted, and the pines were not, the ponderosa pines were not fans of the flooding. Everybody else did fine. We had lots of currant, we had wild rose, I shouldn't say it in past tense, they're still there, aspen, and I'm having a hard time remembering all the species we planted, but those were the main ones. Part of the grant also paid for some educational signage. So we have 5 of these signs spread throughout the park in the planting area. And you can see the plants struggling to get out of those plant guards. We did do that after I believe they were on there, most of them were on there for 3 or 4 years. Other projects that we've done restoration. This is a picture of an aspen grove that we we tried to plant. We put in 300 aspen, also from Ted at Derby Canyon, and we put those guards on them. We actually used the same guards that we had used in the other project. We took them off those ones and put them on these ones, and they were great to guard against deer, but they had no protection against voles, and the voles came in and ate all but 2 of our aspen, which was very disappointing. There are still 2 there. I saw them just the other week, and hopefully they'll do their thing with that aspen do, which is create a community of their own. We've also planted big sage. We have fairly good survival on our sage. It's in the front part of the park that's pretty dry, but there's at least, sage is tough to do, but at least 20% of sage have survived in that planting area. See, there's all the tubes coming off. We take advantage of when we have groups of volunteers, and for those couple of years, we had them go out and pull as many of those guards as we could. We've also done removal of Russian olives, in which we cut them down and poison them right away. And then actually, I think we even went in and burned some of the bigger stumps. Oh yeah, there it is. We went in and burned some of the bigger branches to get red card training. Again, we do it with the fire department. So we sort of try, and every project we do, we try to get, win-win for as many partners as we can. And then one of our biggest projects, we had an ALEA grant. ALEA is Aquatic Lands Enhancement Account from Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, to build fishing platforms. You can sort of see how the ground slopes down towards the pond there. That was from people who are fishing at the pond, not through malice or anything, just wear and tear over the years, cutting that edge back, and it was being really steeply sloped, and it wasn't super comfortable to stand and fish on. You couldn't put a chair because it was so uneven and so steep. And so we got funding to create these fishing platforms. And we worked with Kittitas County Field and Stream, which is the oldest field and stream in the state, to install these. And they were pretty heavily engineered. Big beams with, some were buried under the water, and they're cedar, so they won't rot. Well, they'll rot eventually, but they won't rot quickly. And then we backfilled everything with gravel. And this picture was taken, you can see, around this time of year in 2015. And as soon as we were filling it with gravel, we had, a few more loads of gravel to put in it. An older gentleman with his son and his grandson, so 3 generations, walked up to us and said, "Oh, are you done with the fishing platform?" They sat right down and they started fishing. And the older gentleman said, I haven't been able to come fishing with my family because I couldn't, he had a little chair that he sat on, because I couldn't sit here. It was uneven and not comfortable, but he just was thrilled with that. So we're pretty proud of that project. We have 5 of those around the pond now. Again, we've worked with the fire department. That's a photo on the left of a dangerous house that was on the property. It was dangerous for a number of reasons. It was really old and in bad shape, but the older woman who was living there was being taken advantage of by some really nefarious people who were not just harming her, but doing some harm to the park. So we found help for her to get suitable housing and moved her out, and then were able to get a training burn on the fire. We also, prior to that burn, the Washington Conservation Corps removed substantial garbage from the house and the surrounding property. And then we worked with Kittitas County to spend some money on improving the parking lot area and the pit toilets that were on the property. Now we have some pretty nice pit toilets down there. But it certainly becomes hard to keep finding grant funding over the years, and we spend a lot of time looking for it. But you can't always rely on grants, obviously. Most of you probably know that. And so we really rely on our partnerships and our, building as much of a win into every every aspect of what we do that we can, so we can maximize our inputs. Speaking to that, we look everywhere for partners. We look for ways to get the park more known to our community. It's really not known by most people in the region. So we work with Washington Outdoor School, which is a group from the Upper County that comes down during the school year and runs an outdoor preschool. And we even get the preschoolers involved in habitat restoration. Here they are taking some milkweed seeds in the fall after milkweed has done its thing and putting them out. We have a lot of milkweed down there. We got noticed by the monarch butterfly group. There's a monarch butterfly group in the state that I can't remember the name of, but they were so excited when they saw Helen McCabe Park and all the milkweed that they wanted to name us a monarch butterfly sanctuary, which was fun. We try to get kids out there all year round. So like I said, we have the year-round preschool, but we also do some other projects as well. And we have a really active education committee that's spearheaded by Becca Wassel with Mid-Columbia Fisheries. And she spends a lot of time thinking about ways to get kids engaged at the park, no matter what time of year it is. We run fourth grade fourth grade camp with the schools in Ellensburg. We do other special kid activity kind of field trips. And then we do not adult, but everybody field trips. This particular one on this last photo was one of the Central Washington University professors who's an expert in mushrooms. And they didn't even leave the parking lot area. He had gone into the woods to collect some mushrooms, and he really just pulled out one mushroom after the other and talked to this group of 40 curious people about where to find mushrooms. So that was kind of a fun day. It was bad weather, so people didn't really want to walk around. And then we also work with partners like Connor Parrish at Mid-Columbia. Comes down and grabs things out of the pond so kids can observe and look at them as well. We have other experts that come in from DNR. We have experts from the university and our other partners around the county to really just try and engage people down there. Summer camps are a big undertaking that we do every year, and we're doing a modified version this year. But what's nice about our summer camps is they're all outdoors all the time. And so it's pretty easy for us to socially distance. Obviously not that picture right there. It will look a little different this year, but to keep our kids safe during this time as well. But we love doing that program. We do a lot of restoration. We continue to do restoration, and we've obviously found, like probably most nonprofits especially, that volunteers ebb and flow over the years, except Dave. If anybody knows Dave, he always comes out and he's always helping. We love Dave. So we try to run regular activities that keep people coming back. We have a really active stewardship team that's run by Landon Scheffer, who introduced me, and he's with Mid-Columbia Fisheries. And he works hard to organize regular plantings and restoration activities, trail building, and more. There's that gas-powered auger that the speaker before us was talking, and this is the gravel, really just totally gravel field in the front of the park that we had fun trying to get plants down into that. But the stewardship team does more than just trail building and restoration. They run the plant sale. We had a really successful plant sale this year, and we work with Derby Canyon natives again on that. And I have to say, Ted, if you were on the call, the plants this year were just beautiful. I mean, the healthiest ponderosa pine I have ever seen in my life. They were gorgeous. So we had a really good time with that. And then we do a lot of trail building, and usually we do the bulk of that with the Yakima River Canyon cleanup. It's an annual cleanup that I think Central Washington University has been doing for nearly 40 years, or maybe this was the 40th year, last year anyways. And we get all the football players out there. They give us the football team, so we get 90 or so volunteers out there at the park for one day, and they often break our shovels because they are so intense about digging and moving dirt for us that they get really into it, and they usually break our shovels. So we have to replace those every year. Let's see, just some more getting out and about. We do a red card training every year with the fire department. We never seem to have a shortage of weeds for them to burn, and they usually do that early in the spring. The ponderosa pine that you can see in that, my daughter planted when she was 3 years old, so it's 11 years later. So they'd hit the water table and took off, and it's doing really well. And then we work a lot, we rely a lot, I have to say, on Central Washington University and our partnerships there. That's Dr. Paul James. Some of you probably know him. He helps us every year with our field trips and in really engaging people in riparian habitat, fishery habitat, and all those associated issues. He's a fabulous guy. But we work with a whole bunch of professors up at Central to help us with educating and getting people outside. This is a picture of me. Last year, we were able to extend our lease with state parks. So we have another 50 years to do projects down there and really take care of that park and make it a fabulous resource for the community. And we're continuing to move forward on our Yakima Canyon Interpretive Center project. That's our vision for the park. It has been a long-standing vision. I think ever since the first day that 4 people, me included, sat around a table at the palace and talked about what we wanted to do for environmental education in Kittitas County. We currently have an ALEA grant for an outdoor classroom and picnic shelter. So there's a drawing from our landscape architect, John Barker, building on our gravel field, which really isn't good for anything else. Our outdoor classroom to get kids really engaged out there in just natural play. And we have I hope this works, a short little video of our proposed picnic shelter. Can you all see that? You can't. Hold on. That's our proposed picnic shelter there. So we'll be working with state parks to get all the permits that we need. It's about a 20 by 60 picnic shelter. The back wall is going to be compressed gravel. I'm spacing out the word for it, but it'll be the first structure that is built down at the park, and so we're pretty excited about that. So we're in the middle of planning and preparing for that. And I like how the guy has his hands in his pockets. And that's all I have. That's the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to answer any questions if there's still time.
Thank you so much, Jill. We do have one question for you so far, and it is, what are the key ways to build a strong volunteer base that you can rely on year after year?
If I knew the magic secret to that, I would let you know. Unfortunately, we know that volunteers just come and go. There's natural things in life that take you away. You get interested in other things, or you move, or you have a baby, or you move, take a new job and you no longer have time. But we've really found, and of course, the current situation has thrown everything for a loop, but we've really found that having regular activities, something that people can rely on. So Landon and his team work really hard on having, second Sunday stewardship. Every second Sunday, we usually take off November to sort of March, is some kind of activity at the park. So people know the day, they know the time, they can rely on it. They can make plans to come to it. It's not too much, it's not too little, it's a regular activity that folks can engage in. We found that is the most successful way to maintain volunteers. And also we do a lot of volunteer recognition, you know, when we have speakers come from Central, we always send thank you cards. You know, we do a lot of acknowledgement as well. I think I'm out of time, but appreciate the question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jill. All right, Heather,
thank you, Landon.
Take it away. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Jill, and thanks everyone. We're just going to go over a few questions that we're still didn't have time to answer, and you are welcome to ask more questions in the chat box. Just let us know which speaker it's for. So Bridger, if you're still on, we have a couple of questions for you. The first one is and this is for the first presentation on cottonwood recruitment. What is the timeline for implementing pilot projects? Are you there?
Hey,
Oh, there you are.
you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So the timeline for implementing pilot projects is a little less clear than I would like at the moment, given the situation with COVID. We have a number of areas where we are wanting to engage in these pilot projects, and we have some plans for doing that, as far as, you know, where the sites are going to be, some sense of the funding, things like that. As far as exactly what's going to happen with planting strategy, where the plants are coming from, that is far less clear at this point. It wasn't totally clear to begin with, and it has gotten actively less clear in the last 3 months, unfortunately. But I would say, ideally, in the next 2 to 3 years, there'll be several, maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 projects in different parts of the Wapato Reach that are focused on active restoration.
Okay. Dale Meck just asked, what is everybody's preferred post-symposium beverage, which is IPA, of course. So we'll move on to Bridger's second question for Bridger. Are you seeing any other native species trying to fill in the niche left by cottonwood?
I haven't noticed that myself. That may be more of a question for Tom, just because he has so much more experience in this area. I'm a relatively recent transplant here. There are a number of species, native species that occur in the areas, in those kind of woodland areas where a lot of the older cottonwoods have senesced already, and you have more of a savanna ecosystem, some little carrot family plants and things of that nature, various desert shrubs. But I haven't noticed any native tree species moving in to those spots. There really aren't any other large trees in that ecosystem natively. You have hawthorns and things like that, but those are more of a sub. You know, they maybe get 30 or 40 feet high tops, not 125.
One more question came up, Bridger or Tom. I think Tom left, but do you know of any research comparing wildlife use of cottonwood versus Siberian elm and Russian olive?
Not off the top of my head. I know that there is quite a bit of wildlife use for Russian olive, but it's much different wildlife use. So those trees really just don't have the same size as a cottonwood tree and don't contribute the same types of benefits in terms of shading, in terms of you know, large rooted debris recruitment to rivers, and probably in terms of sort of structural stability of the banks as well. They put out quite a lot of fruit, which I know various, you know, game birds will use and other species, but they really have a pretty, to the extent that they're useful for wildlife at all, it's a pretty different set of uses. And Siberian elm, I'm really not too sure about. There is some of that in the reach that I've seen, but I've never seen a big stand of it, and I've never seen any trees within the floodplain ecosystem that are anywhere close to cottonwood size. There's some that have been planted outside that are quite large.
Okay. Great. So that's all I have for Bridger.
Thanks. Looks like we've got extra questions for Emily as well. Emily, are you still on the line here?
Yeah, I'm here.
So it looks like our first question is, has there been any research on the potential improvements of mussels in states that have been closed to suction dredging?
Well, that's a good question. No, I don't know of any research that people have done to look at improvement after that has been prohibited, but there has been research that's definitely shown the impact of suction dredge mining on mussels, and I've definitely also seen places in some of the streams where there has been mining, and you can really see the impact to the mussel beds. They really can't persist in those areas. So I would certainly imagine that they're doing much better now that they have one less threat. But I'm not aware of any research, no.
Thanks. Next question is, are the fish hosts important for moving mussels upstream? Do adult salmon serve as hosts?
Yeah, the upstream movement, that's really the only way that a mussel will get upstream. Mussels can get washed downstream, so you often will see them, further and further downstream. But yeah, moving up on the fish is the main way. It's more likely that the juvenile salmon are the ones that are going to be carrying the mussels, in part because they're the type of habitat that the juvenile fish hang out in is also the same type of habitat that mussels really thrive in, and sometimes those salmon redds and mussel beds are in the same areas. So it's much more likely that it's going to be those younger fish, and also because mussels do cause fish to mount an immune response when they attach. There's also potential that older fish might have a little bit of immunity to serving as a host fish later in life. But there's not been a ton of research on that with our native species, but still pretty interesting to think about.
Yeah, thanks. Looks like our last question is, are you aware of any discussions on the potential impacts of dam removal on downstream native freshwater mussel populations and how to mitigate those impacts, say if the Snake River dams were removed?
Yeah, so for freshwater mussels, dam removal is it's definitely one of the types of restoration projects that in the short term can have pretty big impacts on local populations. Certainly having healthy rivers with normal flow and temperature is really beneficial to mussels, but with the removal, the transport of sediment and the drying of habitat that occurs can really impact them in the short term. And there have been a few examples of relocations or planning relocations of mussels outside of the area of impact. And that's definitely, what I would consider the recommendation is to remove mussels from the areas that you expect to either dry out or be significantly altered by a dam removal, including deposition, because even though mussels can burrow up and down in the sediment, if too much sediment falls on top of them, they can be smothered as well. So yeah, relocation to appropriate habitat is typically the recommendation. And then with, good habitat forming after the dam removal, you would expect mussels to eventually repopulate those sites.
Thanks. We just got another question for you, Emily. So the lower Yakima has a large population of Asian clam corbicula, as well as a very prolific growth of water stargrass, a native plant. Some folks have wondered if there is some symbiotic beneficial relationship between the two, clam and plant. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I'm not familiar at all with water stargrass, so I don't know what type of habitat they prefer, if increased nutrients or certain grazers, different snails or anything might be associated with it. So I'm not sure I could answer that, but Corbicula does seem to thrive in areas like mussels that are somewhat of a refuge from flows. So I would imagine that anywhere where their juveniles can settle down and then grow into adults and filter, they also would thrive. So it might be a bit of a function of the flow, but since I don't know the plant, I'm not sure.
Thanks so much, Emily. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great. We have a question for Ryan Watts. Are you still with us, Ryan?
Yes.
Oh, great. The question is do photo-degrading tree tubes cause negative repercussions in project sites when they break down?
I don't know. Typically what you'll find, I would assume not. There's a bunch of them in our region that end up blowing away. So they're not in large quantities on the project site. They're, for a lack of a better term, litter elsewhere. And then in the winter months when it's cold, we get a north wind in and it shatters them into small pieces, and those all sort of transported off of the site. So I'm suspect that there isn't, but I don't have any sources to answer that question.
I would imagine that a lot of them just end up in the water system, and like a lot of our plastics, and break down and make their way to the ocean potentially.
Yeah, they're in a turbine somewhere.
Yeah. That's the only question I have for Ryan. It looks like there's another question for Emily. It says, you mentioned that we can submit to the database. Can we also look and see what species may have been reported in our watersheds? I'm sorry if you already covered this.
Yeah, so you can submit records to the database, and then currently the easiest way to get information about which species have been reported in your area is to contact me via email, and I can send you a spreadsheet and give you some background on those records. Hopefully at some point we will have like a watershed level map that you could navigate online, but we haven't managed to get that together yet. And then we also have published a paper on mussel decline in the U.S. that does show a somewhat now outdated series of maps for each of the species. But if you wanted to take a quick look at that, you could check that as well. But yeah, feel free just to get in touch with me and I can share, the really specific information with you.
Okay, we have another question for Ryan. It is, any advice on established cottonwood poles as part of a flood fencing effort? You said they don't establish as well as willows when deep planted, so how to grow them from large poles which also catch wood and sediment?
So we've actually done this, just exactly what that person's asking, and not many of them grew. We used they were probably 6 to 8 inch by 10, 12, 15 foot tall, and we put them in upstream of our restoration site to help capture the tumbleweeds that came down the Columbia, because we'd had a project site that every year would get overtopped by X number of feet of tumbleweeds. And so we thought a living fence to help capture these tumbleweeds was a good idea. And so we dug big trenches and filled them with 6 to 8 inch diameter by 14, 15, even 20 foot tall poles. They did a great job of collecting and stopping the tumbleweeds, but not many of them persisted. They all leafed out but then died.
Hmm.
Have not had, even in the nursery environment, propagating, which is, you know, a semi-controlled environment, really the success rate of cuttings from black cottonwood, as readily available as the seed is, I guess, from a nurseryman standpoint, is it's much more efficient to grow it from seed rather than a cutting. And then we've also seen that in the field as the installation practitioner, is that the cuttings that are installed, black cottonwood species, you can go into a project figuring that you're probably going to lose 40 to 50% of those cuttings are never even going to leaf out. Not 100% sure why, but over the years, where we're involved in writing of plans, have moved away from black cottonwood from live stake, and actually try to avoid it if we can, even in the nursery.
Okay. That's all the questions we have so far. Does anybody want to throw out another question, or we can wrap up? Let's give it a few seconds to see if anybody else has any more questions. All right.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for our first day of the virtual symposium. Really appreciate your participation. A huge thank you to all of our sponsors, as well as our planning committee, without whom this would not be possible. And then also, I'm going to try something a little crazy. We're going to go ahead and unmute everybody in just a second and just say a quick thanks to all of our presenters today. It takes a lot of time to put together these presentations, and you know, the timing isn't great since we had to move to the middle of field season, but really appreciate everybody's time and effort and had some great discussion today. So I'm gonna unmute all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Details tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you guys tomorrow.
Thanks.